Welcome back. When are house rewires required? Probably shouldn't eat now and then go and do the video. Yeah, when are rewires required? Now, rewires, firstly, big job. They're a giant inconvenience. Probably the biggest electrical job you can ever have done in your property at any one time. They're just an inconvenience because a rewire requires the replacement of all cables, all accessories, fuse boards, floorboards up, walls being smashed out, plastered being done, redecorating after, carpets, all sorts. Big job, big inconvenience, but it's required sometimes. Now, the reason they're required is normally due to age. Okay, like anything, like a boiler, like a roof, like your vehicle, eventually they will need replacing. And the time frame for them isn't actually as long as everyone thinks. So the old rule of thumb used to be every 25 years have your property rewired completely. Now the reason they said every 25 years was one, down to the changes in regulations and safety, but two was mainly down to the age of the cabling. I haven't actually got anything I can show you here. So basically, this. Bear with me 1 minute. I should really plan out these videos in advance, but I never do. Right. This is modern cabling. Okay, this is what it looks like. It is just grey and has 3 wires on the inside, maybe a few more if it's a certain type. Sometimes comes in white. Heck, even sometimes comes in red. I've seen it in red before. Now, this is all covered in plastic coating. Now, the reason for that is these wires in the middle never want to touch, ever. They all do a different job. If they touch, it goes bang, or it goes flash, or it electrocutes someone, or it causes a fire, or best case scenario, it just turns off your fuse board and stops working. Now, this insulation is plastic, effectively. That's all it is. It's a very high-grade plastic. The reason for that is plastic is a very good insulator. Heck, anyone who did primary school science knows it's a good insulator. Hence why everything is electric. Everything with electric has plastic around it. Your car battery has plastic around the wires for this reason, and that's only DC. But the problem is plastic has come a long way in the last 50 odd years, and by that, yes, I'm all for being. I'm firstly saying I don't agree with very thick plastic. My own personal opinion, especially with plastic waste in the world. But the old cabling used to have a more of a rubber-based polymer in the plastic. Okay. Now the problem is with rubber starts breaking down over a period of time. If it dries out, if it gets cold, if it gets too hot, the rubber starts getting affected. It's just like having rubber in your school bag or something like that. You leave it out, eventually it does funny things to it. Okay? If you don't know, leave rubber, put rubber in a bowl of water, leave rubber out in the sun. It will do all sorts of different things. Now, what happens when rubber starts breaking down is it actually means it can start cracking. So this cable, look, I can do that, I can bend it, blah blah blah, do all that. It's not going to damage the plastic, it's not going to damage the cable, it's not going to do anything like that. But the rubber stuff does break down. Okay, that's what it does. It starts crumbling, it starts cracking, it basically leaves the copper exposed on the cable, which means they can start touching, or you could touch it. Big no-no nowadays. And that was very big up until probably the late 60s, I'd say. And that's when they started introducing the rule, okay, it needs to be upkept. So if your electrics aren't, if they're 1960s, they're going to need a rewire. Because this stuff is called VIR, it's not safe. Yeah. It's not just VIR, it's vulcanized. Oh, I can't remember the name. What does the I stand for? I know, I'm gonna go with integral. Okay, it's a guess. It's a shot in the dark. It likely ain't gonna win me a prize on a game show. But vulcanized integral rubber. Yeah. So I need long day. But that's what it is. So that's the first rule. Secondly will be electrical safety, and that normally comes down to your fuse board. Now, fuse boards are recommended to be replaced every 10 years. Most people don't, okay? If you've got the old rewirable cartridges, that means they're from the 70s, okay? That means it's got to be replaced, it's got to be upgraded. You've got no correct safety devices. It's your fuse board that will turn off in the event of a problem. If you're lucky, you may just need a fuse board upgrade. If you've got an older property, you may just need the fuse board upgrade on it. But it's why you need to get an electrician out there to check it. Get them to do a EICR or a periodic, and they'll explain to you, if your property's safe or not. And then thirdly will be best practices. Now, best practices in the electrical industry have come about on leaps and bounds considering what they used to be. And by this I mean we've learned from our mistakes in the electrical industry. So best practices are sort of like, okay, it's not a regulation, but by following this, it's going to limit the chance of a problem in the future. Okay. Now, best practices can be defined as a number of things. It's how cautiously you strip up the cable and how tightly you terminate the screws on a conductor. It's basically your assessment. Do you think it's going to cause problems in the future? And a prime example for that is when we fit back boxes. So these are what normally go in your wall behind the sockets and the switches. You will have one of these, just a little metal back box. And what happens is the cable, you knock through these little round things. The cables come through. You fix it to the wall, and then the little screws on the edge of like a switch or a socket, they screw into these. And it basically fixes it to the wall. It screws the socket back between the wall and the back box, creating a barrier. Now, a good example of best practices is normally what it used to be is you would just get one of these, give myself a cooler, you would knock it out, see the little hole, you would take it out, and then you would just grab a cable, and old electricians like in the 1960s and 70s would just go like that. And that's, you got to imagine, that is how the cable entered the back box. Doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with it. But the problem you've got is this is very serrated metal. So what happens is if you put a cable in there, particularly if you plaster it and you push the cable in between the serrated metal and that, what can happen is it can start breaking down. In fact, I'll just show you this, okay? I'm just going to rub this against the inside of this while I'm talking, and I'll show you. Obviously, this is a more extreme version of what could happen, but I mean, I've definitely seen it before. So, see how that's starting to break down? That's what it does, it cuts into it bit by bit by bit. Now, if you put enough pressure under anything, it will snap. It will just start breaking. And as soon as you get down to the good stuff, so if we show you that, it might be difficult to see, but can you see there is a very, very thin bit of copper in there where it's exposed? A very thin, I might add. And that's all it takes. That little bit of copper metal touches onto the back box, boom, your electrics fail, could cause a fire. And the reason we get around this is we fit a thing called grommets. Now, they are on one side, they are the right side. Now, these are grommets, okay? And all they do is they just sit in the little bit you've knocked down, and you create a rubber surround around the cable. You put the cable in there, it's not going to cut through. And it's these little things, little tips and tricks and best practices that the electrical industry has made over the years to better protect your property. In fact, my personal opinion, by following new cable, you put new cables in, they're better polymer, they've got less rubber polymer in it, and following best practices, I'm confident your electrical system could go longer than 25 years. Apart from like just regular testing and probably fuse board upgrades, the basic electrics of it, like the cables in the wall, could probably go 30, 35, 40, 45, we have no idea. But that's the point to consider. That's why you might need a rewire. Again, you get an electrician out there, he does a survey of the property, does a test certificate, they will inform you if it has these or not. And if it doesn't, you can make a plan to go from there. But yeah, hope it's been helpful. That's kind of a few key points why you may need a rewire, why they suggest a rewire, things like that. And it's just a couple of examples. But yeah, I hope it's been helpful. If you've got any questions or anything like that, just drop below in a comment. We'll try and help out what we can. Fan out, like, share, subscribe, watch all the channels on the screen, all the other videos on the screen, and we'll see you on the next one. All the best.